Welcome to all those watching at home, RGS governors, staff, students, OGs, and the wider academic community of Guildford. Thank you all for joining us this year for our virtual scholarship conference. I hope you've found the recorded lectures as stimulating as we have, and thank you to all those who have already submitted questions. If you would like to submit questions during the interview, you may do so via the Teams Submit Question function.
With us now, following up on the social and political talks, are Dr. Theophanis Exadactylos, Lord Popat, and Tony Thorne. Dr. Exadactylos is a reader in politics at the University of Surrey, whose research focuses on European politics, and whose talk earlier in the week was entitled Europe in Flux, Post-Brexit, Post-19, and Post-Trump. Lord Popat is a Conservative life peer and British businessman who was the Prime Minister's trade envoy to Rwanda, Uganda, and the DRC. And earlier in the week, he gave an interview focusing on his experiences of and views on race and British politics. And Mr. Thorne is a language consultant at King's College London, and his research focuses on contemporary slang and the language of subcultures. His talk this week was entitled New Words from a Very Long Year, the Language of 2020 and Beyond.
So let's dive straight in. With the theme of our talk being that of a new normal, perhaps the most obvious catalyst to a change in the status quo has been the COVID-19 pandemic. In light of that, how has the outbreak affected your work, and what's possibly your new normal? Perhaps let's start with Professor Thorne, as I think you mentioned in your talk that the outbreak had actually caused a shift in your, you'd moved from weaponized language to COVID-19 language. How has that been, and is this likely to carry on for the future?
Well, when I study language, I don't just study the definitions and meanings of words, but I try to look beyond that at the social impact of the language, and particularly, as I said in my talk, new language. And I think it was inevitable, given that I'm trying to cope with that, the social impact aspect, that while I was looking at the language of populism, the language of politics and media at the beginning of 2020, in fact, by the first week of March, that's over a year ago now, I found that the media and the conversation, the private and national conversation, was overwhelmed with words and terms relating to the pandemic. Although we were only then coming to terms with the awful reality, I think the language came thick and fast, if that's the right expression. So I had to turn my attention to it, and it then preoccupied my attention from the first week of March 2020 until today. And I'm still collecting new terms and trying to track the changes in the type of language we're getting, but also I'm trying to go again further and look at the way messaging, instructions, encouragement, and advice is coming to us, and how we're reacting to it, all by way of language.
Brilliant. Now to Dr. Exadactylos, have you experienced a new normal in light of the COVID pandemic with regards to your field?
There is plenty to discuss about the new normal in the context of politics, in the context of European affairs, obviously, but also in the context of me as an educator. As your colleague mentioned, I teach at the University of Surrey, and the first sort of contact with this new normal was precisely our shift to online teaching, to hybrid learning, things that you have probably experienced in the context of your school as well. So that was a first shock. The second shock obviously had to do with our ability to do research. As social scientists, as political scientists, we go out and we do field work. We interview people, we dig out archives, we talk to elites, we talk to policymakers, and obviously we travel a lot. And that has definitely affected the way we do our business as such, right? How we engage with our own research agendas. But in terms of the actual heart or the substance of the research agenda, there was a direct shift of attention when the pandemic first hit, which had to do with the responses that governments were putting forward to combat the pandemic. And here in the UK, we experienced that in a quite lively fashion. Obviously, when the first news were coming in, the publicity that the expats from China, as they were returning, they faced this kind of publicity up in the Midlands. The whole situation around traveling, around working from home, around the lockdown measures. So all these were quite interesting for us as political scientists altogether, and particularly for me, as my research agenda focuses on issues of public policy and European affairs. Now, as you probably realize, the European Union, which is the core of my research agenda, is a setting of countries that depends on the freedom of movement. And therefore, one of the primary challenges that we had in the context of the European Union was precisely the shutting down of borders and the restriction of movement across the different member states. And at the same time, we also identified the variability in the types of measures that national governments were taking and how coordinated those measures were at the European Union level in response to the pandemic. So we had countries that had stricter, more stringent measures, let's say. We had countries that took a more light approach to the pandemic. We had debates as to who should be involved, how should people be included in those decisions, and of course, how should people be supported in those decisions with financial aid, with support to businesses, with welfare support, with support at home through the national health systems. So overall, you can realize that this new normal, despite being a new situation that we all had to confront, opened up a very interesting horizons for our research projects altogether. So I got involved in writing a book about a comparative approach to the COVID-19 responses. A few articles are coming up as we speak. And here's where my research probably joins with Professor Thorne's research, because I study the mediated environment in terms of the polarization that newspapers, media outlets create, or the unity that they create in the context of the pandemic. So all very interesting areas.
Yeah. And finally, Lord Popat, have you experienced or witnessed radical changes or supposed new normal in your field?
Thank you, Mohammed. In fact, it's an honor and a privilege to be interviewed again from your school, Royal Grammar School. In fact, the COVID-19 pandemic has changed the way we socialize, we work, and we live on an unprecedented scale. But COVID was one problem for me as a politician. And the second issue was Brexit. Both came more or less at the same time. Mm-hmm. And my interest in Parliament is trade and investment, to look after UK PLC, to do more trade with Africa. And COVID-19 has been difficult for us to liaise with them, to talk to them. But because we just don't know where the world is going to be. The world will not be the same and should not be the same. And none of us know where we will be at the end of this journey, end of this pandemic. This is a crucial moment for change and renewal for all of us. We should see this as the best opportunity to change our mindset. This exceptional crisis obviously requires exceptional response across the world. And this includes political change too. Hence, our Prime Minister this Monday produced what we call integrated review as how Britain will be moving forward post-COVID, post-Brexit. And we want to be more global than ever before. We are no longer having those directives from Imperial Brussels. So we are quite independent in our trade and investment policy right across the world. But we don't want the global to be a slogan. We want it to be real business. So in terms of my work, frankly, in fact, for most politicians, our work has more or less doubled because of large number of legislation going through in Parliament. And I'm a whip as well, so I've got to make sure that we vote for all the government changes and amendments taking place in different legislation. COVID legislation and Brexit legislation all coming at the same time. So it has been busy. We've been working virtually. A good thing is save time traveling. For example, I save 10 hours, so I can have the 10 extra hours working here. But more important, we are engaging with other countries despite COVID through this technology of Zoom and other means, trying to create more wealth and jobs for them and for us. And my brief is Uganda, Rwanda, and DRC. So this is where I'm talking to ministers all the time. What can we do after COVID, and how are we going to approach it? How are we going to address it? And how are we going to overcome the crisis we're all facing today?
Brilliant.
Thank you. Mr. Thorne, you mentioned how language has shifted during the last year or so, and Dr. Exadaktulos, I believe you touched on how I think language is polarized. I wonder if either of you would like to go a little bit deeper into how that has affected our political discourse and how that polarization has altered things in that sense.
Yes, I'm politically very naive because I assumed completely wrongly that when the pandemic arrived, there would be something like possibly a national government of conciliation or a gathering of all the talents that the government might consider that it wasn't. And I'm sorry, I'm a linguist, I'm not a politician, but this is a sign of my naivety that this didn't happen. There was never any serious suggestion that it might happen. I hope it does happen now with some retrospect. All I'm saying is that we start to see words like convergence and consensus again, words we haven't seen in political discourse for 3 or 4 years. So, I can't separate the political realities from the language used to express them, although I'm supposed to be impartial and objective and looking at the language scientifically. And I hope I'm being coherent about this. I think we're still now, and you can see in the developments of the last few weeks, we're still in a situation where the political landscape is polarized, where people are using language, they're using phrases like culture wars, which in the context that we are still in, I think is unfortunate. But again, I'm not supposed to make those judgments. But I hope this is some sort of answer to your question. And I hope that as things develop, and as perhaps the situation becomes slightly ameliorated, there will be some convergence of policy and convergence of ideas, and therefore a new set of linguistic imperatives, if that doesn't sound too pretentious.
Brilliant.
That's very interesting, Mr. Thorne. Lord Popat, I wonder if you've seen, sorry, man.
Oh, no.
Lord Popat, I wonder if you've seen that polarization of language in your work, sort of in the sort of trenches, I guess, of politics in your work in the House. I wonder if you've noticed that polarization of language or not.
I think I've seen some of it, yes, but in many ways, Tony is right. We are going through this unprecedented times and big crisis. I mean, we are going to see huge economic problems over the next 5-10 years. And it's important that we have, a Centreground politicians working together to see how we can improve or do better, and work together as a team maybe would be a good way of addressing that. Will give confidence to the people of this country as well. It's not left or right, it's something we want to do and achieve. We are going to go through huge debt because we are paying for furlough and the cost of pandemic, which is coming to roughly £400 billion. And we have to raise this money to repay it over a period of time. So I think the political language is very crucial at this difficult time. This is no different from what we went through during the World War II, and we need to unite and work together as a team. I mean, luckily, the opposition leader, Starmer, is very much a Centreground politician. So in many ways, we have seen that the policies the government is coming through, he's very much, or his party is very much in agreement with.
Could I add to what Lord Popat said, without, I hope, flattering him? I think the House of Lords has been one one setting in which we have seen some convergence in ideas and some moves toward the center already. But I think that in my talk, I don't know if people remember, but I finished by talking, by suggesting that, again, as Lord Popat just said, it's no longer really meaningful to talk in simplistic terms about right versus left and right and left, although conservatism and self-defined progressive politics still exists in people's minds. I think those are dated terms. And I talked about bottom up and top down. It's interesting whether or not you're a Guardian reader, and again, I'm being objective, I'm talking about language. The Guardian today suggested that we should move to a new scenario in which the contributions to policy should not only come top down from authority to the public, but that other stakeholders, including ordinary people, pressure groups of all political persuasions, should be allowed to contribute to, now the Guardian was talking about policy, but in my small field, I would say also, and I've been saying for a year, should be allowed to contribute to the messaging, to the way we talk about these things. I hope that makes sense, that we should be thinking bottom up and top down, not left versus, not in outdated notions of left versus right.
Yes, I agree with you. This is why my first question I answered, I said, this is a crucial moment of change in renewal for all of us, and that should include political change too.
There is definitely something to be said there about political change, primarily because at the start of the pandemic, and this is not only here in Britain, but elsewhere, political forces did not engage in their usual blame shifting or pointing the finger to governments. They kind of stayed back from doing that. Obviously, there is a political cost that comes with every decision. We're still inside the pandemic, so we cannot really judge what the impact or the outcome of those political decisions have been until we are out of the woods. At the moment, we are pretty much inside the woods, and we don't necessarily see the end of the tunnel. We have hints about what the end of the tunnel, or where the end of the tunnel is, but we cannot really know what's expecting us on the other side. So I just hope that polarization exists within society. There are those who praise the public for adhering to the rules, for taking the right steps, for following government advice. There are those who say, oh, the government is restricting us too much. There are those in government who take tough decisions for our futures, and there are those who say we shouldn't touch certain issues, or we shouldn't be going in one particular direction. And then, of course, there are the external pressures. International relations are at strain at the moment. There is a change of guard in the United States. We need to see how that pans out, and what that means in terms of how the United States as a partner looks like from now on. It has been largely affected as a country, one of the worst hit places in the world by the pandemic, and one that had a very controversial year of the pandemic, with President Trump disregarding the virus, with not supporting Americans in the same way that we've seen elsewhere, in sort of taking a stance in favor of conspiracy theorists and so on. So the language that exists in the public sphere is quite diverse. So I take the point, of all the challenges and opportunities, but we need to ensure that this kind of polarization does not get embedded into our political rhetoric. And this is probably where Lord Popat is an important, pivotal actor alongside his peers of any party, right? To try to engage in this more constructive spirit, in this more consensus-based, consociational spirit, effectively, that brings different interests together, right? Here in Britain, we follow a model of pluralism, obviously, where a lot of different interest groups, a lot of different social groups have the opportunity to feed in what the government does and how, and be consulted on government policies and direction of those policies. However, there is also a degree of simple plurality in the sense that those voices may exist, but they may not be necessarily included in the outcome of the policies. And here's where is my call to Lord Popat in trying to preserve as a political institution the inclusion of different interests and the representation of many different interests in understanding primarily what this new normal actually is and what it means, and how society can move alongside that new normal and make deeper changes and make changes that are a force of progress rather than a force of division.
Correct. In fact, you're right. I mean, one of the good things that we do as a country compared to, say, US or India or any other country is that you will see every morning a cabinet minister on Sky, BBC, ITV. Every 2 weeks, the Prime Minister also does question and answer with the news and media. So we do pass as much message as we can to people, what we're doing, how we're doing. But you're right, we should be asking, what more can we do? What other areas do you think? Please tell us. You know, we're open to discussion, we're open to this debate, we're open to take your things, and how can we make it better in this very difficult world we're living in, and we don't know where this journey will end in there after pandemic. So I think you're right, involvement of other groups and taking their views and taking the opinions is good. But we do come as much as possible, unlike many, I mean, you never see US president coming on the TV and saying what's happening in the pandemic, or the Indian Prime Minister. We are so democratic that way. We do give a message. I think the message is good. It's the way we deliver is very important. You know, we are sort of talking as if we're imposing on people rather than saying that we're not imposing you, this is how we're going about it. And that's important. It's the language sometimes as well.
Brilliant. Lord Popat, you mentioned a while ago about an integrated review to make the UK more global than ever by engaging in other countries and creating more wealth. And this is quite interesting because in your discussion with Tom and Amit, there was a conversation about the future of trade with Africa. Could trade with Africa become a key component of post-Brexit trading?
Well, Africa is a huge continent, 30.32 million square kilometers, which is bigger than America, Canada, Europe, and India and China put together, with huge natural resources and huge potential. Our share of trade with Africa is about 3%. It used to be 30% not long ago. Many of those African countries were part of Commonwealth. We have a special bond with that continent because of English language, rule of law, judiciary. Most of the African leaders were educated here. We saw the lady being appointed president of Tanzania, was studying at Manchester University. So English language is crucial as well. So we have huge potential. In many ways, we were too continental, and we ignored that continent in the last 4 decades. It is time we get back into it, help them invest there, create jobs and wealth for them. They have a liking for us, they love us, they look up on us, and we have never been around. I mean, in Uganda, for example, for 30 years, there were 2 ministerial visits. Since I became a trade envoy, in the last 3 years, we had about 15 visits. So you can see, how much they're eager to trade and work with us, and we've not been around. So if you look at and Africa is a continent, in fact, in the next 20 years, a quarter of the world's population will be African. The population is going to double from 1.3 billion to 2.5 billion in literally the next 3 decades. Emerging middle class, democracy is young but maturing day by day, very effective opposition, they have most free press. They're getting better day by day. By us being there, we can make a huge difference. In fact, they started African Free Continental Trade, which is a common market for Africa from 1st of January. 54 countries, the largest free trade area in the world. So being global Britain should not be looking at Chinese Sea or Indian Ocean as just people we can trade with. There is somebody else who's more important, more energetic, and that's the continent of Africa. And my own experience, for example, we have more than double the trade. We have more than fivefold the trade in the last few years with Rwanda and Uganda. And you can see the transformation that's taken place in Rwanda, for example. A French colony, now they speak English, they've joined Commonwealth, we've helped and supported them. We have direct flight London, Kigali, London from Heathrow Airport. So if we get, to be global should not just be a slogan, but we should be in there, working with them, trading with them, and supporting them and helping them.
And it's not just about trade. I'm sure Lord Puppet will agree that maybe the economics comes first and is the most visible aspect of this. But we're not alone in this. There are other people there, particularly China, who are not only exerting economic influence, but are beginning to do what we used to do, which is develop soft power, develop cultural influence. And that's a vital second aspect, I think, of trying to engage with that continent, and something we haven't been, in my personal opinion, paying much attention to recently either.
You're right, Tony. In fact, we had amazing soft power with Africa 3-4 decades ago. Yes. We don't have as much as we should have. Soft power is key, but I'm not a career politician. I come from a business background, and my brief is envoy for trade and investment. So soft power is fine, but I want to see hard cash as well for both countries.
Of course.
But you also want to see the respect for human rights, the respect for civil liberties,
correct,
and equality develop alongside. And I think here's where the difference between Europe and the United States vis-a-vis China or Russia that have approached the African continent is. Effectively, this kind of growth should not be at the expense of the local population being suppressed by authoritarian regimes, by militant groups, by ethnic division and civil war. So I think it is also important that there is some sort of intervention on that front. Otherwise, we may see all these kinds of efforts land in the wrong hands and people misappropriating the power that this trade can give them in order to further sustain themselves in power. The Chinese are very good at that. They give aid without any conditions. They invest without any conditions other than having a return. The Russians are doing it too. And we see how this has operated in the context of the pandemic as well, where Russia and China were first to send vaccines down in the continent in various countries. So the soft part of the diplomacy is also tied very well with the hard part of the diplomacy. And it is a race of who gets there first in terms of allegiances, in terms of building future relationships, and in terms of taking advantage of emerging markets or cooperation in order to make something of an improvement. I think I'm not wrong in that, Lord Popat, am I?
No, you're right, Theo. In fact, we are a country that promotes gender equality, environmental, climate change, all that. We are at the forefront in the world. If I just talk about Rwanda, for example, with the genocide, 1 million Tutsis were killed 25 years ago, and now the country is transformed. Kigali is the greatest city in the world. If you look at Kigali Parliament, more than 52% are women. So there's gender equality in Kigali. If you look at the parliamentarians, members of parliament, more than half are women. So Rwanda is a good role model. We are working using Rwanda as a model, but we want to make sure that human rights are very equally important. And we take it very seriously. For example, on DRC, UK Export Finance have lending criteria to lend to these countries. We have none for DRC until they improve human rights. So we as a country, we have amazing number of NGOs and institutions who put pressure on us, which is good, who are there physically to make sure all this happens at the same time. Our job is to create jobs and wealth, but most important, get people out of poverty.
Mhm. And I think that's very important in the context of the pandemic as well, because we've seen how, and probably in your own assessments and reports, there is this kind of disproportionate effect and impact of the pandemic in countries of the world that are not as affluent as we are here, or in the West in general.
I mean, one thing I did only recently, or my government did as trade envoy for Uganda, is we withdrew support for oil and gas to support climate change. Now we had about £2 billion worth of UK deals to build refinery and a pipeline in Uganda. Mm-hmm. And I think we've now decided it's not something we'll support anymore because we really put importance on climate change.
Mm-hmm. In the aftermath of Brexit then, or in the sort of, yeah, now that the UK has left the customs union and is looking to sign trade deals with those in Africa, is that kind of balance between supporting interests like climate change, etc., and trying to sign trade deals that help British businesses, do those two go hand in hand? Or do you think there's maybe a slight trade-off there?
Well, we obviously trying to sign post-Brexit. We are trying to sign trade deals with every country we can to make trade and investments easier, simpler. But all that we do take all this into account, especially human rights, is like we have issues in Uganda, so we haven't yet signed a trade deal with Uganda. I understand they're ready to sign, but for example, we signed one in Kenya 8 weeks ago, but we haven't signed with the neighboring. We didn't sign with Tanzania because we had problems with the late President Magufuli. Or hopefully the new president will work in the way we were looking for them to work with us.
Brilliant. There was a question for Mr. Thorne. It was, under what timescale can we expect the amelioration of the words you described in your talk, given that they have such negative connotations at the moment?
I think it's very difficult to predict. If you, again, look at the newspapers, just in the last couple of days, people who perhaps know something have started to talk in terms of the current predicaments lasting much longer. Things like travel restrictions, for example, the sort of practical examples that we're all facing. I think it's very difficult to again, from my particular angle, very difficult to put a timetable or a meaningful roadmap. I mean, the term is an attractive one, but roadmaps don't actually, even in their original corporate form, don't have timetables attached to them. And I think it's awfully difficult at the moment. Of course, I hope, like everybody else, that the language that's been generated just in the last year will recede, will subside, and will no longer be relevant. But I think I mentioned in the talk that there are some areas, particularly perhaps working from home, remote working, and changes in the working week, which I suspect are going to take hold and are going to remain with us. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think people may reconceptualize the way they work and the way they travel to and from work and the sort of spaces they need. I think that's something that's likely to last, and the language that goes with it will last. Other things we hope that the medical emergency aspect, the medicalization of our language, we hope will recede. But again, I suspect that it's changed our mindset, that we've become sensitized to health issues, and that's not going to go away. And that may be a good thing, that is sustained.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we're going to have to start to sort of begin our sort of end sequence, as it were. So we've got two questions that we'd like to ask all of you. The first one is, so for each of you, given the discussion that we've had this evening, is there a question that you'd like to ask another member of the panel? So Lord Popat, if you'd like to.
No, in
Is there
fact,
anything you'd like to ask?
the only question is how do the two panelists think where we will be post-pandemic, once just what their views are on that?
I find it difficult to make predictions. Perhaps it's my lack of expertise in other fields, but I don't see certainty in predictions at all. As I've said today and previously, I hope there will be a new convergence between the polarized lobbies and interest groups in the UK in particular. You can see, I think already there are a few positive signs coming out of the United States that show us that there can be a radical realignment quite quickly, political realignment, and actions taken quite rapidly to reverse some of the political damage that's been done. So that I think that is a good sign. We can't follow this. Our circumstances are very different in many ways from the United States, and we've reacted differently. We've done some things better, and most things better, I think, than the previous regime there. But so I think there are signs, and I think that is a sign of perhaps an abstract sign of that can give us hope that things can change for the better, and decisions can be made to get us out of this situation that we're still, as we've all said, we are still in.
I guess the parameters that are uncertain at the moment are plenty, and this is why I would concur with my colleague that we cannot make predictions, but certainly we have lessons to draw out of this climate and this pandemic in terms of going forward, in terms of public policy and policy making. I think for a long time there has been a shift away from the human center of the policies, right, and into more, say, political or economic type of gaming. And I think here what we've learned is that humans should really remain at the center of policy making. So we should make policy with our fellow citizens in mind, support initiatives that empower people, that give people access to services, that allow people to run their daily activities under this new normal condition. So, supporting mothers, supporting those who have lost their jobs, supporting those who are in the least sort of affluent strata of our societies, and of course, not forgetting that the heart of the pandemic was the National Health Service. And these, not only do the members of the NHS deserve working conditions that are appropriate for the job and the duty that they're serving, but also the people on the receiving end of those services need to feel that security, that there is someone looking after them, that there is someone that will tend to them if another pandemic comes up, or if similar medical troubles show up.
I hope it's not too fanciful, but to try and finish on a positive note, we've seen something very strange in the vaccination program, which has been uniquely, in my personal view, successful. We've seen the coming together of what Boris Johnson described as capitalist greed and implied capitalist dynamism coming together with the National Health Service, which is something very different and something we cherish as being something democratic. And when those two things unusually work together, it seems to have had a dramatically good outcome. And as I say, I hope that doesn't sound naive and factual. But new alignments, as I say, new convergences, perhaps can move us forward faster than we've been thinking lately.
Yeah, Tony, and in fact, I agree. This is a crucial moment of change and renewal for all of us. And we should see this as a best opportunity to change the mindset of politicians and people. Everything has changed, the way we work, the way we live. And we hope that we will have, both political and social change post-pandemic for the better of mankind.
Brilliant. Dr. Exadactylos or Professor Thorne, do you have any targeted questions for the other members of the panel?
My question to Dr. Exadactylos, Professor Exadactylos, is probably not worth posing. I mean, I'm still curious about what's going to happen vis-a-vis our relationships with Europe, because they've been, for very obvious reasons, put on the back burner, set aside in a sense. But the global Britain, if it's more than just a slogan, has got to also incorporate continuing understanding of the culture of the European Union and continuing collaboration with it. And I wonder if he feels optimistic, again, if it's not too naive, about that course. Lord Popat's talked very convincingly and inspiringly about a possible new areas, not new, of course, but possible reinvigoration of our relationships with other parts of the world. But I wonder, what of the European Union in the current situation?
Primarily, from now on, Britain will not be inside the European Union to be able to manage the way the European Union evolves. And as part of my talk, I was actually referring to some of those opportunities that exist within the European Union in terms of the direction of travel, of integration, but new areas of cooperation, the dynamism that has emerged out of this pandemic so far, and the solidarity among European Union nations and states. So I think that it's only to the benefit of Britain to take advantage of the neighbors next door, right across the channel, because effectively, historically, culturally, politically, and socially, this is the closest set of countries that Britain can relate to. Everything else falls under the remit of international relations and can be managed in a very different way. So unfortunately, in this case, I'm the political analyst, and Lord Popat holds the executive authority, or his institutions and the government hold the executive authority in deciding the direction of travel. But it would be very unfortunate if Britain does not take advantage of the previous ties and also the opportunities that may come up in the future relationship of Britain with the European Union, and just close that door for good. It is important that we continue to cooperate. It is important that we continue to incorporate ideas and learn and socialize with each other as trading partners, as political partners, our partners within international peace, because that's also important, and to work hand in hand for the better view of the world in general.
William, I think we're a bit pushed for time. So, Dr. Exadactylos, do you have a brief question you would like to ask any other member of the panel, either Professor Thorne or Lord Popat?
I would like to focus a very short comment, maybe from Lord Popat, on issues of racism and inequality, because that is an important area that we have seen growing in Britain as well, especially in the aftermath of Black Lives Matter and the way that it translated into this country in terms of the reaction. And also on the basis of that, to Professor Thorne as well, whether there is something to be said about the embeddedness of racism and inequality in our own linguistic devices.
Could I start, because I can answer very quickly. Lord Popat may need to say more. I'm very optimistic, because whether one feels hostile or welcoming to notions of political correctness and wokeness as they're caricatured. I think there's already a lot of work going on in academia, but also among interest groups in decolonizing what I've written about it, decolonizing the dictionary, and focusing on the aspects of language, which again are only the surface of underlying problems in dealing with ethnicity, in dealing with xenophobia and nationalism. And I think there are already, that in parallel with everything else that's been going on, and perhaps quietly in the background, there's a lot of work has been done and is being done among activists, but also among academics. And I just hope that the funding that supports that, and not just that, but the arts, if we could mention them in passing as well, in allowing the arts to engage with these issues, that funding will still be in place in the future.
Great. In fact, Theo, it's a good question. In fact, lately we've seen some tension in this particular area, especially with the emergence of BLM movement, Black Lives Matter movement. It's playing and instigating social change. Whilst I welcome that particular movement and support the cause to remove racism of any kind, we should be tolerant and peaceful in our protest. What I did last year, I published a book called Very Subject. I can show it to you here. You can email me or email Muhammad or Hugh your address. I'll be very happy to sign one and send it to you. I mean, the book is very clear that if you come as an immigrant in this country, if you work hard, integrate, speak English, you can make a success. In fact, I came as an asylum seeker myself from Uganda. You probably heard about the brutal dictator Idi Amin. And frankly, I had no formal education. I worked as a waiter, but we have this country gives you the push to study in the evenings. So I did business studies and qualified as an accountant whilst I worked at the same time. So this country gives you amazing opportunities. If you come here, work hard, and embrace British values. I was talking to someone this morning that, I'm British Indian, or I'm British, not because I live in Britain, but I'm British because Britain lives in me.
Thank you so much, Lopar. What a lovely note to end on. And thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you, Mr. Thorne, Dr. Exarchopoulos, and Lord Popat. That's been a really great discussion, I think. And we've got to wrap it up there. But I just want to say to everyone watching that the STEM talk with our other three panelists starts at 6 p.m. And all of the talks from all of the panelists are still available on the Sway link emailed out by Dr. Bradford. And thank you so much once more for coming. It's been really good, I think.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much for inviting us all in this wonderful talk. And I wish you all the best of luck in your future careers. I think you as senior students in the school are the generation forward. You have been through this pandemic. You will feel it in your skin. Don't get me wrong, but you will make a success of it as long as you believe in yourselves and you find inspirations in the things that you want to do in your future lives.
And we're relying on you.
Exactly.
Fantastic.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So I think that's it then. Thank you once again for joining the talk, and brilliant. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, James.
Thanks very much, Mo and Hugh. Thank you for running a very masterfully balanced show.
Thank you.
It's a great pleasure.
Thank you.